Thank you. It is a real privilege to be with you. I regret that I do not speak the heavenly language of Spanish, but my aunt did. She was a missionary to Cuba before the days of Castro. That's how old I am. And I remember she would come home, and in our Sunday school, I did learn some Spanish. She taught us a song, Tu luz o Cristo, tu luz divina, llena mi alma con gloria santa, or something like that. Did I murder it? There, you've heard all of my Spanish, but she was a good aunt, and we have enjoyed a good family through the years. And now, my family, sometimes every about 4 or 5 years we get together. They're all in different parts of the country. And when we get together, we love to do things together. But one of the things that always happens is partway through the 2 or 3 days that we're gathered, one of the kids will say, we should watch a movie together. Okay? So you know what happens then. All the kids start talking about what movie it's going to be. And of course, they know all the new movies, the latest and the greatest and so on. And towards the end of the afternoon, just because they haven't decided, they might turn to me. They might turn to me and say, well, Dad, what movie would you like to watch? And I'll say, Fiddler on the Roof. And they just roll their eyes. If you don't know, Fiddler on the Roof was 1970 or something like that. And they say, oh, you are such an embarrassment. And I am. But I love that old movie because, I guess I identify with it a bit. It's the story of a family in Ukraine back at the turn of the century, a Jewish family. And times are changing. And Tevye, the father, is having a tough time with change. He loves his daughters. He has 3 wonderful daughters. He loves them dearly. And he is so looking forward to being the papa that marries them off, because it's the papa that would make the arrangements as to who they would marry. But as he talks with his daughters, he finds that his daughters have a different idea. These times that are changing are bringing new thoughts. And they tell him that they would like to marry for love. Marry for love? This just shocks him. I mean, at the same time, he sort of gets it. And he understands. But it causes him to start thinking in himself, and he starts to wonder about Golda, who he's been married to for 25 years. And he gets really risky. He does a very risky thing. And he turns to Golda, and he says, they want to marry for love. Do you love me? I want to show you just the song that is the answer to that. Go ahead.
Golda is a good man. I like him. He's a little crazy, but I like him. And what's more important, Huddle likes him. Huddle loves him. So what can we do? It's a new world, Golda. A new world. Love. Golda, do you love me?
Do I what?
Do you love me?
Do I love you?
Well?
With our daughters getting married and there's trouble in the town, You're upset, you're worn out. Go inside, go lie down. Maybe it's indigestion.
No, Goldie, I'm asking you a question. Do you love me?
You're a fool.
I know. But do you love me?
Do I love you?
Well.
For 25 years I've washed your clothes, cooked your meals, cleaned your house, given you children, milked your cow. After 25 years, why talk about love right now?
Goldie, the first time I met you was on our wedding day. I was scared.
I was shy.
I was nervous.
So was I.
But my father and my mother said we'd learn to love each other. And now I'm asking, Goldie, do you love me?
I'm your wife.
I know. But do you love me?
Do I love him?
Well?
For 25 years I've lived with him, fought with him, starved with him. 25 years my bed is his. If that's not love, what is?
That you love me.
I suppose I do.
And I suppose I love you too. It doesn't change a thing, but even so, after 25 years, it's nice to know.
I know I'm a hopeless romantic, but I love that. He asks, do you love me? And she's, well, I do this for you, and I do that for you, and I clean your house, and I milk the cow. She said, I know, but do you love me? And she goes on again, well, I'm your wife, And it's like she heard his words, but she didn't quite hear his heart. And I think we struggle the same way often as followers of Jesus. It's easy for us to hear the words, but sometimes we miss the heart of what Jesus is saying. We don't quite hear. He says, do you love me? And we say, well, hey, we've got a really good tech crew. We have the best worship services in the Ascension. No. But you know what I mean. We tell him all the things that we do. And he says, yes. He says, I know, but do you love me? Well, we evangelize. Yeah, I know, but do you love me? We worship. Yeah, I know, but do you love me? Do you love me? It's so easy for us to simplify things down to just mere words and miss the heart. You as a church at this point in your journey are yearning, and as I've talked with your leaders, you're yearning not just to hear words, but you're yearning to hear God's heart. And I want to say that at this time in your journey, God has spoken to his people all down through the years, and he has not overlooked you. He has a word to say to you. I can say unequivocally, God is talking to you today. And you can hear his heart. And today I'd like to give you just 3 listening postures from the life of Moses. I'm sure there are more, but 3 postures from Moses, who was a man that over his lifetime he learned and heard God's heart and was never quite the same. And I believe that if we follow Moses' example, we may find our lives are never quite the same either, in a pretty wonderful way. So I'd like to just share with you 3 postures that will allow us to hear God as Moses did. The first posture is the posture of surrender. The posture of surrender. We cannot hear God's voice and his heart when we are fixated on our own plans and preferences. God will speak, and we will think we are hearing him, but we will not be able to truly hear his heart. And Moses didn't understand that to begin with. As a young man, as a smart man, as an ambitious man, he was ready to lead the children of Israel up out of Egypt. What a noble, noble ambition, called of God to do. And in Acts 7, we read when Moses was 40 years old, he decided to visit his fellow Israelites. He saw one of them being mistreated by an Egyptian, so he went to his defense and avenged him by killing the Egyptian. And Moses thought that his own people would realize that God was using him to rescue them, but they did not. What was happening here? You see, Moses, although he knew the call of God, Moses had his own agenda. He was so wrapped up in saving his people his way that he couldn't hear God. And after that debacle, God took him to the wilderness for 40 years. And during that 40 years, Moses learned the most important lesson of all: how to hear God. I don't know about you, but I am so much like Moses. I want to see people come to Jesus. I have an understanding of the call, just like Moses. But let me just back up a bit. Even though I know all that, I have a plan. I know how that needs to be done, you know. I figure out how things should be. I have to confess, that's the way I operated as a young pastor. You look around, you figure it out, and say, okay, this is what we need to do. As I make plans, and I make these plans, and I'm going to tell you something, my plans don't involve pain for my family or for me. My plans, they don't involve failure, where I learn about the grace and love of God, where I learn character and integrity. My plans don't involve brokenness, where I come to understand dependence and my great need of God. And best of all, I'm not sure if you will like this, but I think the German service would like this. It's something I've observed in German culture is your plans don't take forever, you know. They're not circuitous. They happen, and we make them happen now. That's like my plans. They don't require patience. And you know, I can pray and I can fast over my plans, and God answer my prayers. But you know, without surrender, these prayers and these disciplines simply become attempts to manipulate God to my way of thinking. And I have learned, as Moses did over the years, that if I want to hear God's heart, I have to adopt the posture of surrender. And the reason that is so difficult for me is that it's in direct opposition to my desire to be in control. Surrender doesn't come easily to me. You call me to sacrifice for Jesus in front of you, I'll do it. You'll see me make my sacrifices. It kind of feels good. You ask me to do some great work, I'll rise to the challenge. And it has taken me some time to learn that the real test of faith is not how successful I am, but how surrendered I am. It's strange, but I don't think God uses my successes very much. His successes are so much different and richer and deeper than my puny, manly attempts? What if he never intends for my children to become what I want them to be? What if my marriage will never quite be whole the way I want it to be? What if everything goes perfectly? I want everything to do that, but what if everything doesn't go perfectly? Our faith, you see, is a faith in which we are called to die daily. What if he asks me to surrender my wealth like he did the rich man in Matthew 19? You see, here is the problem. When we keep our own agendas, there is no peace, really. There is only anxiety. We are, in a sense, quarreling with God. I keep, in my spiritual way, fighting with God for him to do things the way I want him to. The ways that are comfortable to me. The ways that I'm in control of. The most Christian prayer we can ever pray is the prayer Jesus prayed in the Garden of Gethsemane when he said, Lord, not my will, but yours be done, and do it your way. And the greatest block to our surrender is not our appetites and wayward desires, but our addiction to running our own lives. Amen? There's a second posture that we find Moses. There's the posture of surrender. But the second posture I find fascinating. It was the posture of stillness. You will notice that Moses heard from God at the burning bush, not in the rush of life. And the sin I fall into is not that I shake my fist in defiance in the face of God. I would never do that, and neither would you. My sin is that I passively rebel against God by filling my life with so much work, so much noise, so much busyness that God's voice cannot or will not penetrate. It's much more comfortable, by the way. Fenelon, an old Catholic priest, and there's some pretty amazing Catholic brothers, he said, God does not cease speaking, but the noise of the creatures without and of our passions within deafens us and stops our hearing. We must silence ourselves to hear in the deep hush of the whole soul the ineffable voice of God. Why do you think that all down through the ages God has called us to Sabbath rest? Could it not be that he wants us to be still so we hear him? I love the words of Mother Teresa. She said, we need to find God, and he cannot be found in noise and restlessness. God is the friend of silence. You see how nature, trees, flowers, grass grow in silence or stillness. See the stars, the moon, and the sun, and how they move in silence. The more we receive in silent prayer, the more we can give in our active life. We need silence to be able to touch souls. She said, the essential thing is not what we say, but what God says to us. Can you hear God's heart? And yet our worlds are filled with the endless noise and busyness that drown out that voice. At least that is really true in our prospering North American continent. But I think it's also true wherever prosperity starts to become a reality. You know, cultivating the quiet can be a painful experience, especially when we're addicted to noise and excitement. It takes a great deal of courage to become still and listen to God. Listen to what we read here in the passage. It says, after 40 years had passed, an angel appeared to Moses in the flames of a burning bush in the desert near Mount Sinai. And when he saw this, he was amazed at the sight. And he went over to look more closely. And he heard the Lord's voice, I am the God of your fathers, the God of Abram, Isaac, and Jacob. And this sentence, Moses trembled with fear and did not dare to look. You know what I have discovered? I have discovered at times I am afraid to slow down because if I do, the truth of myself will crash in on me. Do you know what I mean? Somehow I just know that if I stop, God will speak, and I am terrified of what he might say. I just know he's going to beat me up. That's, I think, what is back in our minds. And I don't want to do the work of relating to him. And so I'll just keep busy doing my own thing. It's much more comfortable. Just like we sometimes do in our marriages and in our churches and with our kids. We find diversions. Nice diversions, but we find diversions. We can find diversions, and so we go to recreation rather than to Jesus. Or we can find diversions, so we have work that we are just loving and enjoying. We go to work. Just about anything. We'll go and watch TV. That's I would say a diversion is any place we go other than Jesus for what only Jesus can give. And a voice deep within my soul tells me that something is wrong, but I am too afraid to slow down and find out how life could be different. You really want to hear from God? Do you want to hear his heart? Stop. Just stop. Now, we all become still differently. So I know that me saying that can be sounding a little terrifying, but I want to say that each of us becomes still in our own ways. I'm not telling you to become still like a monk. I'm not calling you to become still like a pastor. I'm saying we need to become still the way God's made us. Let me give you some examples of what I'm saying here, because that's the principle of stillness, not how we get there, that is important. You got to get there the way God has shaped you. So for me, I'm weird, all right? I'm a kind of guy that's a little bit of a mystic. There's not many of us. And at first I used to be embarrassed about this, and I never did it because I thought if anybody ever found out, they'd think I was really crazy. But the way I become still, and it's for me, I go down into my study, and I have a little table in my study, and I have a few chairs, and I sit in one of the chairs, and I just imagine that Jesus is over there in the other chair. It took me a long time to make eye contact with him. I finally got there. But I sit there and I light a candle. And there, as I watch the candle, my heart stills and I begin to experience the presence of God. And we have our conversations. Not that he talks back, but I sense what he's saying. You know what I mean? There's that heart conversation. Now, I told my father, who is now passed on, but he was a godly man, that if he was to become still and hear God, he needed to go sit down in a study and watch a candle burn. He would have gone stark raving mad. That would have just created all kinds of anxiety in him. It's not the way he was wired. I used to wonder, how does my dad hear God? And I began to realize as I got older what it was. Because at first I wondered if he ever did. But my dad used to love woodwork. And he loved to work with his hands. And he would go out into his workshop. And it took me a while to realize, but in his workshop, as he worked with his hands, his heart stilled. And there in his workshop was this holy place. And he talked with God. and he heard God. But you're not maybe a craftsman. You might be like my pastor friend Adam. I was an associate of his for a number of years, and I used to be concerned that Adam wasn't having enough time for his sermon preparation. So I said, Adam, we got to help you cut out some time so that you have enough time. And it was a losing battle. I'd come in the morning. One time I put the filing cabinet against the door so he couldn't get out. But I didn't do that. I only did that once. But what I found was that he would come in, he'd kind of read the scriptures a little bit, think about what he was going to be preaching on, or a sermon that he was preparing, and then he'd be gone. And I'd come in and I'd say, where's Adam? And they'd say, oh, Adam's gone, he's gone running around Cultus Lake, which is a lake nearby where we live. It's a big lake. And Adam would go there, put on his running shoes, and he would run around the lake. And I began to realize something about Adam. It was in the nature and in the running that his heart stilled. Mine wouldn't have stilled in the workshop. Mine wouldn't have stilled running around the lake. But that was his holy place. And that's where he became still. You know, whoever you are, Gary Thomas did a great book on sacred pathways, and another gal, Myra Perrine, wrote on it as well. You can probably get these books in Spanish, but what I love about them is that they help us to understand that we're all unique. Being still and hearing God doesn't mean you have to be who you are not. You need to find your holy ground. And I would be a fool to say that this is easy. It's not. It's like, one day you can't have a life that's filled with diversions and the next day be in holy rapture with God. A drug addict cannot expect to give up drugs without paying the price of withdrawal. And we who have been drugged by diversions in this culture, our iPhones, our screens, our recreation, our sins, how easy pornography is these days, all these things can be places we go for comfort other than Jesus, other than being still and hearing him. As Gary Thomas said, it's hard because our souls will roar for diversion, the fix that saves us from God's presence. How true. How true. So take courage. Take courage to face these demons of our fear and our boredom. They only need show their faces, and we tend to lapse into unceasing activity to escape them. But we must escape them. We must push through if we are to hear the voice of God. And here's the thing. When you do, those fears about being in God's presence, you will find that God is the healer. He doesn't bring us into the presence to beat us up. I had one dear friend, old gentleman, say to me, Dave, if you're getting beat up, it's not Jesus. You get that? If you're getting beat up, it's not Jesus. And you will find that as you get into the stillness, he wants you there not to beat you up, not to condemn you, not to show disappointment. He wants to let you know how loved and how valuable you are to him. It's why he went to the cross. And when you sit in his presence and you begin to experience his love, you start to hear his heart. And it's a wonderful heart. If you want to know and hear the heart of God like Moses, stop. Stop and find your holy ground, whatever that ground is. Well, I'm going too slow here. I better speed up. Last point. If we want to hear God's heart, we must take the posture of dependence, posture of surrender, posture of stillness, posture of dependence. And here you'll find that Moses really had no choice. Gifted though he was inadequate for the great call that God had placed upon him. He failed. We think that's terrible. I think Moses' failure was the making of him. He failed. And it took some years in the wilderness for Moses' pride to be broken. And when it was, he had no illusions about his abilities. And when God came and said, it's time to lead them out, Moses knew he couldn't do it. He said, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? And for a whole chapter, Exodus chapter 3, he gave all kinds of excuses and reasons why he was not the man. And he pleaded with God to send someone else. But you know what? Moses was ready. He could hear God. He could hear God. You see, dependence is the realization that I can do nothing of significance apart from God. It leads me to rely on Him. Even in where I have my abilities, I realize how unable I am. And where I have disabilities, it makes me realize how able He is. It leads me to rely on Him. You know, when I started out as a husband and a father, and I shared this with the man on Thursday night, I figured I knew what it took to be a good parent. I was a young man. Our first child was born when I was, 24. And we were going to be a fine Christian home. After all, I was going to be a pastor. My home would be a wonderful, brilliant example of what a Christian home should be. I mean, I just knew it because I'd read all the books. I listened to all the speakers. It wasn't until I began to understand as my children grew how troubling I was to them. It wasn't until I began to understand how they felt about themselves, a large measure of the way that I had treated them, that I came to a place where I realized I really didn't know how to parent. And I called on God like I've never called on God in my life. I don't know about you, but the older I get, the less I know. The more I need to know God's heart. And I challenge you this morning. To consider the postures of Moses. It may be uncomfortable to begin with. But do you really want to know God's heart? I don't know, perhaps God's nudging you this morning. Maybe it's around the area of surrender. You've never really thought of it. You've never really paused to say, how would God do this calling that I feel is so important? You know the calling is good, but have you ever stopped to ask the question, God, am I doing this the way you want me to? Or is this my agenda? There's an old poem in English, and I can't translate it for you, but it basically says, I ask God for this. It's like asking God for all the successes in life. So I asked God, to be a good father, and He made me humble by realizing such and such. So it's like I ask God for this great thing, and He gives me some humbling teaching thing. I ask Him for another great thing, and I get some other humbling thing that teaches me to rely on Him. And it gets to the end of the poem, and it goes like this: I got nothing that I asked for, but everything my heart desired. Isn't that God? And maybe He's calling us to that point of surrender where we just let go of our way. And maybe it's a little more risky to do it His way. There's no control. But oh, it's rich. Can't be explained, but it's rich. Or maybe God's calling you to this point of stillness. Maybe He's asking you just, you haven't stopped and sensed my presence. When was the last time you felt my presence? Felt stillness? I'm not asking you to go and be a monk. You know how your heart stills. I work in jail with prisoners, and I have one prisoner who struggles so hard to know that and believe that he's valuable to God. And I've said to Jason, he's able to have a guitar in prison, and he loves to sing. And I say, Jason, just go to your cell and sing that piece, the goodness of God. And he does. And it's in that stillness that all the lies of the devil are broken. And he hears the sweet voice of God. Maybe he's calling you to stillness. Or maybe it's this dependence. You know, as Mennonites, we don't really like the idea of failure. I don't think it's just Mennonites. I think it's all of us. We don't like the idea of failure. So we fight it like crazy. And I get it. I understand that. But sometimes God calls us to the place to realize that we're failures, that we can't do it. He is God and I am not. And here you are struggling, wearing yourself out, fearful that if you fail, somehow you're going to be shamed. Have you ever thought of just falling into the graceful hands of God and saying, I can't do it? What do I do? Do you want to hear God's heart? The posture of surrender, the posture of stillness, the posture of dependence. You know, if you really want, that the fact is, God does speak. The question is, do you want to hear him? Do you want to hear him? I love the story. I don't know which book I read it in, but it was a story that ended this particular book, and it was the author pictured two pathways. There was a pathway, there was a road that was straight, just like a freeway. And you could see right down the freeway, you could see the rest stops, you could almost see the destination. At the beginning of the freeway, at the beginning of the road, there was a map. And so everything was totally predictable. There was that road. And then there was another road. And it was just a dirt rut. And you couldn't see very far because it just kind of wound off and went around behind some trees. And you couldn't see it anymore. And there was no map. All there was a journal of a traveler who had taken that road at one time. And the traveler was so informative. He just said, it's a great road. It's worth it. That was it. And you know, in our lives, we want the straight roads. We want the roads that we can control. We want the roads that we can predict. We want the roads where we can fix the destination, and it is going to be so. But God calls us to a road. He calls us to a road where much is unknown. A road where there is no control. And all he says is, trust me, the trip will be worth it. Which road will we adopt as God's people? You're going into a time of prayer. If we take the road that we can control, we will get what we can do. If we take the road and surrender into it, the road calls us to, which is fraught with things that we don't understand and requires trust and dependence over things that we cannot control, we will get what God can do. I want to invite you this morning to take the road less traveled, the windy one, the unpredictable one, the exciting one with God. It won't be easy. I can promise you that. Surrender never is. It won't be easy, but it'll be worth it. You may never be perfect in this life. You may have troubles. You may need God every day. Wonderful. Your perfect life is saved for heaven. Great, we're going to have it one day. But right now, if you will take the road he gives to you, you will have a relationship with him that will see you through every situation and bring you home gloriously to Jesus with a heart that is at peace and at rest in the eternal. I pray for you, I pray for me, that we will hear the heart of God and surrender into it. Amen.